Wimbledon is a major interchange station in southwest London. I believe there's also some sort of annual sports match around there, but that's not important right now. It's served by South Western Railway, Thameslink, the District Line of the London Underground, and the trams. It's the only interchange between the Underground and the trams. And, just a little way outside the station, it has a seaplane hangar. Wimbledon is a long way from the sea, and has no major rivers running through it. And yet it has a seaplane hangar. Why does Wimbledon have a seaplane hangar? Well, really, this is two questions. Why is there a seaplane hangar, and why is it in Wimbledon? See, this building actually dates from the First World War, and wasn't originally located in Wimbledon. It's from Newhaven. Now, Newhaven is an excellent place to build a seaplane hangar. Now, I assume you don't need me to tell you that the First World War was a big deal. Europe had never seen a conflict on this scale. The 1914 hopes that it would all be over by Christmas were quickly shattered as a stalemate developed between the two sides. In this mechanized conflict of the 20th century, the glory of war and gentlemanly ideals were exposed as naive and outdated concepts. Instead, both sides tried to break the stalemate by coming at the conflict from different angles. Britain's superiority lay with its navy, and they imposed a blockade on the North Sea with the intention of starving Germany into submission. Germany decided that two could play at that game, but there was no way they could beat Britain's navy in a conventional fight. Therefore, they turned to U-boats, which I guess means that they were starved into undertaking a sub-mission. Interesting. U-boats could approach unseen and ambush vessels. First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Arthur Wilson, declared them underhanded, unfair, and damned un-English, and that all submariners should be treated as pirates. Which didn't stop the British from using submarines of their own, but it's the principle of the thing, dash it all. It was all very well complaining about submarines, but what are you going to do about it? The problem was technological, so too was the solution. In 1914, the Royal Naval Air Service was formed, equipped with seaplanes. The seaplanes, as the name implies, were designed to take off and land on water. They could either be launched from ships or coastal bases, and could spot the U-boats from above. Although they could be used for bombing or later torpedoing enemy vessels, the primary purpose was reconnaissance. The planes were primitive by modern standards, bombs had to be dropped by hand, and communication with base was by means of carrier pigeons. The planes could only be launched on fairly calm waters, and even then it was risky. Furthermore, if the waters were too calm, the planes couldn't raise their noses to take off. Newhaven was a major supply port, so naturally it made sense to put a base there. The base was about half a mile up the coast from the town. It was built in 1917 and expanded in 1918. The shed in question was built in 1918 for the purpose of repairing damaged aircraft. It's a Type G Admiralty building. As an aside, in a nice piece of symmetry, the workforce at the base were housed in old railway carriages. Seaplanes patrolled the Channel coast between Dungeness in Kent and the Isle of Wight by day. By night, it was too dark to see. Even when crews could see, there were risks. If they spotted a surfaced submarine where it shouldn't be, they were to signal the submariners with flares to determine whether they were friendly. If the submarine was below the surface, orders were to bomb first and ask questions later. The base had a short life, closing in May 1919. The buildings were auctioned off in 1920. They were quickly built modular structures that could easily be moved as required. And so the larger, newer hangar headed north to Wimbledon. And now we need to skip back in time to before the war. In the world of commuter railways, a revolution was afoot. Electrification was coming. Electric trains were seen as the future, fast, clean, and quiet. Several railways jumped on the bandwagon, but one that didn't at first was the London and South Western Railway, the railway that ran through Wimbledon. They eventually came around to the idea in 1912. Work began the following year with the first sections of electrified track opening in 1915, and a power station being built at Wimbledon. And then, after 1916, work stopped. You know, what with the war and all. After the war, there was some reluctance to resume the programme. It seemed likely that the London and South Western would be nationalised, so the directors were reluctant to fork out for something they wouldn't benefit from. What actually happened was that the London and South Western was grouped into the Southern Railway in 1923, who resumed the programme in 1925. The big mystery is, when did the hangar arrive in Wimbledon? It was sold in 1920, but at that time the London and South Western were being slow about electrification. Drawings indicate that it was erected by the Southern Railway, which suggests that it had been sitting around for at least 3 years. Presumably it was in place by 1925 because it was used for storing electrification equipment. This, in fact, was the attraction of the building for whoever it was that actually brought it here. The building was only needed temporarily. But of course it wasn't there temporarily. It stayed there. It outlasted the goods yard, it outlasted the power station, and it's still there. London has many reminders of war, but I don't think any are quite so strange as the Seaplane Hangar that's nowhere near the sea. It's now Grade 2 listed, so this relocated temporary building isn't going anywhere. Good evening, I hope you enjoyed this underhanded, unfair and un-English tale from the tube. If you did, please do click the like button, and if the mood takes you, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more. Thanks as always to my generous donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the enormous metal shed to my submarine spotting planes. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.